My name is Larissa, and I would like to share with you the reasons why I think that the Little Mermaid, Disney's Little Mermaid, is a Neo-Platonic piece, that it has references to Plato, and more specifically, that it has references to the Allegory of the Cave, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And so before I do that, before I establish the connection between the Allegory of the Cave and the Little Mermaid, before I do that, I would like to the best of my ability, I would like to explain the Allegory of the Cave. So here's an image that illustrates the Allegory of the Cave. The first thing we see is that we see people and things inside the cave. This is inside the cave, and this is outside the cave. So because this is an allegory, there's something I would like to explain. An allegory is a lot like an equation in mathematics. When we see an equation that says x equals a plus b plus c divided by d, for instance, so an allegory works a lot like that, except that instead of saying this equals this, in literature we say this represents this, or this symbolizes that, but it has the same structure. So first I will explain the literal aspect of the allegory, what we see in the image, and then I will explain what it represents or symbolizes. So, like I said, we have first inside the cave and outside the cave. So inside the cave, we have two levels. So first we have a row of people, and these people are looking at shadows. And then we see another row of people, and they are holding up objects, clay objects, and there's a fire on a pillar, and they are holding up those objects in front of the fire, and those are the shadows that the people here are looking at. So the people on the first row, the people that are looking at shadows, they're supposed to be slaves. They're chained by the neck and by their ankles, and they're facing forward. And all they can see are shadows. And then the people on the second row, they are holding up, like I said, those clay objects, and they put them in front of the fire, and those are the shadows that the people here are looking at. Then we see people climbing out of the cave. And as you can see here, there's a guy that is like covering up his eyes, because the people here, they're not used to the light, to the sunlight. So one thing you don't see here is that because they're not used to the light, the only thing that people can discern, or the only thing they can see, are shadows of objects, like the shadows of trees, or the shadows of birds, or of mountains. And then once they get used to the light, then they can finally see trees, birds, mountains, and so on. And then last but not least, we see the sun. And so a summary is, here you have a row of people, they're looking at shadows. Then another row of people, they're holding up clay objects, and those are the shadows that the people here are looking at. There's a fire. Then we see outside the cave the shadows of objects, the shadows of trees, mountains, birds. And then we see the actual trees, mountains, and birds. And then we see the sun. So Plato found a different way to explain the allegory of the cave, and it is something that he calls the dividing line. The dividing line is something like this. So we have the bottom part and the top part, and then we have left and right. So at the bottom, this is what would be the world inside the cave. And this is outside the cave. And then to the left, he has reality, which he calls metaphysics. And then he has the way in which we come in contact with reality, or rather, the state of mind we're in when we come in contact with reality. And we'll go over those levels. So the world inside the cave, he says that it symbolizes the physical world. And the world outside the cave symbolizes the non-physical or the intelligible world. So the world inside the cave, which would be this world, is the world we can grasp with our senses. The things that we see, we smell, we taste, we hear, and we touch. The world that is the tangible or the physical world. And then here outside the cave would be the non-physical world, non-physical matters, the things that we can grasp with our intellect. So here we have the tangible world, and up here we have the intangible or the intelligible world. And last but not least, the sun here symbolizes the good, which I will explain later. Now, broadly speaking, according to Plato, the state of mind we're in when we're in touch with the physical world, he calls that opinions. And the state of mind we're in when we're in touch with the non-physical or with the intelligible world, the state of mind we're in, he calls that knowledge. Now, something very important is that these words are not used the way we use them. These are terms of art, like Platonic terms of art. This is the way in which Plato used those words, or rather, the way in which those words that Plato used, the way in which they were translated. Now we're going to go over what each level represents or symbolizes. So like I said before, this is a row of people that they're staring at shadows, and then the row of people that are holding up clay objects. So the row of people that are staring at shadows, according to Plato, those shadows symbolize or represent images of objects or of people, images. And I will explain what that means. And the row of people that are holding up clay objects, those represent people or objects in the physical world. So when he says images of people, the first row, what Plato means are images such as a reflection in a mirror or a reflection on a lake, or a painting of an object, like a painting of a chair or of a table. It could also be a sculpture of a person. In our current time, it could be a picture or an image on a screen. He calls that images because we're not in touch directly with the person or with the object. We're in touch with an image of that person or of that object. Plato also said that images could also be the reputation of a person, because we're not in direct touch with the person. We are hearing what someone else says about that person. So the reputation also falls under the category of images. And then we have the people or objects is when we're actually in touch with people or with an object, when we're in touch with a chair directly, not the image or the representation of that object. Remember that to the left we have reality, physical and non-physical matters, and to the right we have the state of mind we're in when we come in contact with reality. So the reality inside the cave, the shadows symbolize images, and the clay objects symbolize the actual objects or people. So, according to Plato, the state of mind we're in when we're in touch with an image of an object, like I said, a painting, a sculpture, and when we confuse that image of the object for the object itself, he says that the state of mind we're in is imagination. Again, it's not used the way we use it currently. It's used in the Platonic sense. So he says we're in the state of imagination because we're not in touch directly with the object. We're in touch with the image of the object. Same thing when we hear the reputation of a person, because we're not in direct connection with the person. He says that we are in a state of imagination because we're in touch with the image of a person. And that would be the level of the shadows. This is the level of imagination. And then when we're in touch with the actual objects, he calls that state perception. We are perceiving when we're in touch directly with an object, like a chair or a table, or with a person. And that would be the level of the clay objects. Then we go outside of the cave and remember that we have the shadows of objects, the shadows outside the cave, and then we have the actual objects, the trees, the birds, the mountains. So according to Plato, the shadows of the trees and birds and all that are a symbol for what he called the lower forms. And the actual trees and birds and mountains are a symbol for what he called the higher forms. The original word that Plato used was called eidos, which is closer to ideas. So the lower forms, or the lower eidos, is when our minds are reflecting upon physical objects. The lower forms would be the physical objects, the thoughts we have about physical objects. And then the higher forms are the thoughts we have about intangible matters, abstract concepts such as piety, virtue, liberty, kindness, and so on. So, lower forms, the thoughts about physical matters; higher forms or higher eidos, the thoughts about intelligible matters such as kindness, piety, justice, and so on. And in the allegory of the cave, lower forms, shadows outside the cave, and higher forms would be the trees and the birds. The actual objects outside the cave would be the symbol for the higher forms or the higher eidos. So according to Plato, the state of mind we're in when we are reflecting upon the lower forms, the physical world, the state of mind we're in, he calls that reasoning. And when we're reflecting upon the non-physical world, abstract concepts, he calls that understanding. So according to Plato, reasoning is when we're thinking, what is a chair, for instance? What makes a chair a chair? What is it that all chairs and only chairs have in common? Same thing for dogs. What is it that all dogs and only dogs have in common? Or for trees or for stars? Or when we're reflecting upon a star, like thinking, what are the components of a star? What makes a star a star? And things like that, he calls that reasoning. And when we're reflecting upon the higher forms or the higher eidos, like kindness, piety, virtue, those are things that we cannot touch with our physical senses. We cannot sell piety by the pound, and we cannot measure the weight of kindness on a scale. Those are abstract concepts. So when our minds are reflecting upon those abstract, intangible concepts, he says that we are understanding. And last, but certainly not least, we have the sun. And according to Plato, the sun is a symbol for the good. The good, according to Plato, is the guiding principle that makes all things intelligible. The good is what allows us to come in contact with reality, is what allows us to go from imagination to perception, to reasoning, to understanding. It is thanks to the good that things are intelligible to us. He also says that we humans are naturally wired to seek the good. Both Plato and Socrates said that. It's sort of like the trees that are naturally wired to seek the sunlight, what we call heliotropism. Likewise, Plato and Socrates said that we humans are naturally wired to seek the good. He and Socrates, Plato and Socrates also said that the goal of a virtuous person is to figure out what the good is. And he also says that it is to the degree that we seek the good that we are able to live a virtuous and a happy life. So, a summary, we have the shadows of clay objects, then we have the clay objects, then we have the shadows of real objects, shadows of trees, mountains, birds. Then we have the actual trees, mountains, birds, the real objects, and then we have the sun. And in the dividing line, the shadows of clay objects would be the images. They are a symbol of images such as paintings, sculptures, the reputation of a person, and so on. Then the clay objects would be the objects or people when we're in direct touch with objects and people. Then the shadows of trees and birds would be the lower forms when we're reflecting upon the physical world, and the actual trees and birds are a symbol for the higher forms when we're reflecting upon intangible matters such as virtue, piety, liberty, and so on. And the state of mind we're in when we are in touch with images of objects such as paintings and sculptures, Plato calls that imagination. Then when we are in touch with people and objects directly, he calls that perception. When we are reflecting upon the lower forms, when we are reflecting upon the physical world, he calls that reasoning. And when we're reflecting upon the higher forms or abstract concepts, he calls that understanding. And then the good is the guiding principle that makes everything intelligible, physical and non-physical, and it is the guiding principle that allows us to live a happy life, and that the goal of a virtuous person is to try to figure out what the good is. So now I'm going to establish the connection between the allegory of the cave and the Little Mermaid. So in the Little Mermaid, there is a scene where Ariel is inside a cave. Oh, coincidence. So I call this the allegory of the aquatic cave because all the elements are present here. So in this scene, before this scene rather, the reason why she goes to the cave is because the scene prior to this, in that scene, Ariel gets into an argument with her father. Her father is King Triton. She's a princess, of course. And they get into an argument because the father finds out that Ariel has been going to the surface. He finds out that she's been talking to the seagull, and he's really upset. Well, he's actually worried because he tells Ariel that human beings are dangerous, that they are barbarians, fish eaters. And Ariel disagrees with him. She says, no, I don't agree with you. But King Triton doesn't let her talk. He gets really upset, and Ariel leaves. And she goes to that cave. So I'm going to show you how in that scene all these elements are present. So like I said, Ariel goes to the cave, and she goes there with her best friend, a little fish whose name is Flounder. And when she's in that cave, we see her surrounded by physical objects. She has a lot of objects. These are objects that she has found inside sunken ships. Now, she doesn't really know what the objects are or what they're for. She doesn't even know the names. She calls them gizmos and gadgets and who's its and what's its and thingamabobs. So she doesn't know what the objects are. So before that scene, in the scene of the seagull, the reason why the father finds out that she's been going to the surface, in that scene, the seagull, we find out that the seagull is the one explaining to Ariel what the objects are. But of course, the seagull is not human. So the seagull gives Ariel a completely distorted version of the objects. So in the scene where she's talking to the seagull, Ariel brings a bag with objects, and the seagull goes through the objects like that, you know. His name is Scuttle. So Scuttle pulls out a fork, and he says, this is very, very unusual. And they go like, well, what is it? What is it? And he says, it's a dingle hopper. And they're like, a dingle hopper. They're fascinated. And he says, yes. And now I quote, Scuttle takes the fork or the dingle hopper, and he says, humans use these little babies to straighten their hair out. See? Just a little twirl here and a yank there, and voila, you got an aesthetically pleasing configuration of hair that humans go nuts over. And they're like, wow. And then Flounder says, what about this one? And he shows him a pipe, a smoking pipe. And Scuttle goes like, wow, this is wonderful. What is it? And he says, it's a banded, bulbous snarfblatt. And they are impressed. And then he says, and then again I quote, Scuttle says, now the snarfblatt dates back to prehistorical times when humans used to sit around and stare at each other. Got very boring. So they invented this snarfblatt to make fine music. Allow me. And so that's how Ariel has learned about the objects. She has learned from a distorted version. So at this point, Ariel is at the level of imagination because she's receiving images of objects. She's receiving someone else's portrayal or some seagull else's portrayal of the objects. She's getting distorted views by somebody else or by the seagull. And so that would be the level of imagination. So according to Plato, when Ariel sees a pipe, a smoking pipe, and she thinks that's a snarfblatt, she is imagining. And that would be inside the cave, the level of the shadows of clay objects. So that would be the level of images or the level of the seagull or the Scuttle level. Then we see Ariel getting in touch with the objects, with the physical objects. There are lots of objects. Like I said, there are trunks and books and candle holders and suitcases. There are lots of objects. And so at this level, we would be, or Ariel would be, at the level of perception because she is in direct touch with the objects themselves. That would be the level of the clay objects reflected with the bonfire. And in that scene, there's also a painting. Ariel shows us a painting with fire. And she says, what is fire and what is burn? Well, she's singing the song. So at that point, we are at the level of the clay objects. So at some point in the scene, Ariel tells Flounder about her father. Remember, she has had an argument, and she tells Flounder, if only I could make him understand, her father, if only I could make him understand that I don't see things the way he does. And then she says, I don't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad. And so at this point, Ariel she's not getting images anymore. She's not perceiving. She's doing something else because she's reflecting upon the nature of these physical objects. She notices that these are not just regular objects like a rock in the ocean. She senses, she gets this intuitive sense that these objects are the materialization or that these objects encapsulate creative powers, because she says, I don't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad. So she is reflecting upon the objects, saying that they embody creativity, the creative powers of humans. And she's also reflecting upon humans, saying that if they're capable of displaying all these creative powers, they cannot be bad. So at this point, Ariel is at the level of reasoning, because she's reflecting upon the lower forms. She's reflecting upon the objects and the humans that created the objects. So that would be the level of reasoning and the reflecting upon the lower forms. And in the allegory of the cave, it would be the level of the shadows outside the cave. So there's a point in the scene while she's singing the song, Part of That World, where she tells Flounder, looking around here, you'd think, sure, she's got everything. And then she says, but who cares? No big deal. I want more. Now, she doesn't say that she wants more objects. She doesn't say that she wants more thingamabobs or more dinglehoppers. She says that she wants more of something else, which she proceeds to explain in the song. So I will read fragments of the song and then I'll connect them, because one by itself is not enough. So she says, I want to be where the people are. I want to see when I see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call them? Oh, feet. Then she says, flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing. Then, betcha on land, they understand. Bet they don't reprimand their daughters. Bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand. Now, notice that here she's saying betcha, which means that she's not sure. She has had an intuitive sense that on land, they don't reprimand their daughters. Could be daughters, sons, meaning that people on land are not reprimanded for thinking and for speaking their opinions. So then she says, up where they walk, up where they run, up where they stay all day in the sun, wandering free, wish I could be part of that world. And then she says, she grabs a book and says, and ready to know what the people know, ask them my questions and get some answers. In this context, legs and feet are not literally legs and feet. They are a symbol of the ability to stand up for what you believe in. Because when you see it connected to the other fragments of the song, to the part, like for instance, when she says, bet you on land they understand, but they don't reprimand their daughters. And she says that they are bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand. And then when she says, flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing. So she's not saying that she wants to exchange fins for feet just for fun. She's saying that she wants to exchange fins for feet because she's tired of living life flipping her fins. She wants to be able to stand up, to speak her mind without being reprimanded. And when she says, ready to know what the people know, ask them my questions and get some answers. She wants to have the right of freedom of inquiry. She wants to be able to ask questions, to develop her own rational faculties. So at this point, Ariel is at the level of understanding because she is reflecting upon the higher forms. She is reflecting upon all these abstract concepts, such as freedom of expression, of inquiry, education, curiosity, courage, all these abstract concepts. Something also very interesting that Ariel talks about is about what is a good society, because she says that she wants to be part of that world. And she also says at the beginning that she doesn't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad. So she's saying that that is a good world, that that is a good society. So she's saying that a good society is a society where people can display their creative powers, and a society where people are allowed to speak up without being reprimanded, where people have freedom and where people can ask their own questions, and all those beautiful values. And I think one of the most interesting and provocative things that Ariel says is that in her song, she establishes the connection between creativity and freedom of expression. She's saying, again, not too on the nose, but she's saying that in order for people to develop their own creative powers, that they need to have, the oxygen of land, the oxygen of self-expression. And back to the society, she's saying that in a society that is oppressive, where people are reprimanded for thinking, like the world under the sea, in an oppressive society, it is practically impossible for the creative powers to blossom in the human soul. So she's reflecting upon a lot of things, but especially when she talks about the connection between creativity and freedom of expression and how she links the two. And last but not least, when Ariel sighs and she says, "Wish I could be part of that world," and we see her bathed by the moonlight and she swims upwards, and it's almost like if she wanted to breathe the moonlight. At that point, we see her seeking the good. So it's not the sunlight, it's the moonlight, because it's the evening, but still she's seeking the light of the good. So we have seen Ariel go from the level of imagination, where she gets the version of Scuttle, the seagull, her distorted version of the objects. Then we go to the level of perception, where she is surrounded by the objects. Then the level of reasoning, where she's reflecting upon the lower forms. She's reflecting upon the objects that surround her, how those objects encapsulate creative powers, and she's reflecting upon the humans that have created those objects. Then she goes to the level of understanding, where she reflects upon the higher forms about freedom, courage, education, curiosity, and all those higher concepts or abstract concepts. And then we see her swimming upwards, seeking the light of the good. So I have proven in this video that The Little Mermaid is a Neo-Platonic piece because of all these Platonic elements present in this film, according to my interpretation. And also, according to Plato and Socrates, Ariel is a virtuous mermaid because she's gone through all these levels, and then she strives to know the good. She strives to know what is a good world, what is a good society. So because of that, she is a virtuous mermaid. Also, Ariel is a philosopher because according to Plato, the job of a philosopher is to get out from here, get out of the cave, go from the level of the shadows to the clay objects, and then go outside the cave and reflect upon the lower forms and the higher forms, and also to seek the good. So Ariel is also a philosopher and a virtuous person. And I have also proven that The Little Mermaid is a film that gets better and better with each passing year.